Hi, everyone. Welcome to Coastlines. I'm Angela Antle, the host, and I'm really pleased to welcome you tonight to a conversation with Rick Mercer. And we're going to discuss his best-selling memoir, Talking to Canadians. First, as always, we're going to begin the night with a land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that the lands on which Memorial University's campuses are situated are in the traditional territories of diverse Indigenous groups, and we acknowledge with respect the histories and culture of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. We encourage everyone to reflect on the lands where you're located and the Indigenous peoples for whom those lands are traditional territory, and what you can do personally towards reconciliation in your community. Well, welcome to a very special night of Coastlines. It feels foolish introducing Rick Mercer. He's a Canadian icon, comedian, television personality, political satirist, and author, best known for his work on CBC television comedy shows. This Hour is 22 Minutes, Made in Canada, and The Rick Mercer Report. He's the author of 4 books, all of which have been national bestsellers. Mercer has received nearly 30 Gemini Awards and Canadian Screen Awards for his work on television, and his CBC television special, Talking to Americans, which he writes about in his book, remains the highest rated Canadian comedy special with 2.7 million viewers. Rick holds honorary doctorates from a number of universities, including Memorial University. And he's the recipient of a Governor General's Performing Arts Award for Lifetime Achievement. And in 2014, he was appointed an Officer of the Order of Canada. He is a native of St. John's, Newfoundland. Welcome, Rick Mercer. You can turn on your camera now and your mic.
Hello there, how are we now? I was hoping that that would be a very elegant entrance. After 2 years, I thought I could unmute myself in an elegant way.
All right, welcome. We're really glad to have you with us. And
Thank you, Angela.
we really, really want to hear from the audience tonight. We know there's lots of you out there. So you can type your question in the chat bar or in the comments on YouTube, and Janet will read your questions out. And I would recommend that you get your questions in early in order for us to get to them. We're also very lucky this evening to have writer Ed Riche joining us as our guest panelist. And we've got a backlist of Ed Riche's books to show you while I introduce him. Ed is a writer for the page, stage, and screen. Most recently, he wrote the book for the musical Telltale Harbor with Alan Doyle. And he's a longtime collaborator with and close friend of Rick's. Of Rick's. Welcome, Ed. He was there a minute ago.
He was there. He's there.
He's there. Hi, Ed.
Do I have to call him?
No, it's okay. I'll ask you a few questions while he figures it all out. Well, you're going to do a reading first, aren't you?
I am indeed. And it's so weird because of the times that we live in. This book came out. It was probably more conducive to readings than any other book I've ever done. And in theory, I would have done a lot of readings because I wasn't doing a TV show. But then, of course, COVID happened. So the first reading I did was at Woody Point this year.
Oh, really?
Last summer.
It was a fantastic reading.
But the whole book was released and everything. There were no readings. So it's all very new to me to do a reading, but I'm happy to. This is one I haven't done yet. Part of this book is an origin story, like where I came from, which is no surprise for people who are probably tuning in, the vast majority, because their origin story is probably not that much different than mine. But I did grow up in Middle Cove, but I went to school in St. John's. And this is an excerpt about going to McDonald Drive Elementary School. And there's 2 separate bits that I've jammed together, which may be inelegant, but we'll give it a shot. Everyone can hear me? Okay.
Perfect.
The school I attended was the most modern in the province. It opened in 1971, so it was essentially brand new when I showed up for kindergarten in 1974. It still had the new carpet chemical smell. It was modern in both its design and its cutting-edge approach to education. McDonald Drive Elementary was to be the template for how schools were designed and run in the future. We were the guinea pigs. For starters, there were no grades. Grades were a thing of the past. Grades did something to one's confidence. So instead, we had pods. You see the difference there. I'm not in grade 4. I'm in pod 4. But by far the biggest innovation at McDonald Drive was the lack of walls. Each pod consisted of 100 children. The pod system recognized that if you have 100 children to educate, dividing them into 3 or 4 smaller groups in separate classrooms with privacies and walls would be cruel and unusual. Far better to put all 100 children in one giant classroom with 3 teachers. We were free-range children. The entire thing was conceived by an educational consultant who had clearly never met a child and currently resides in a hospital for the criminally insane. By the time I hit grade 1, sorry, pod 1, battle-weary teachers had started to erect small barricades and faux walls in direct contravention of the no walls philosophy. These attempts were mostly for naught. The din was constant and punctuated by random screams from elsewhere in the pod. It was like being in an abattoir. You might be in math class with 30 kids, and over to your right, another 30 kids could be having a sing-along, while to your left, kids were watching a slideshow. There was no pattern in the chaos. At McDonald Drive Elementary, each pod had distinct areas for the 3 classes plus 1 staff room. But even the staff rooms were open concept. The teachers would enter and exit through a large open archway. By the time grade 3 rolled around, 8-year-old me was spending a lot of time on the floor outside of that archway. That is where you were sentenced to sit if you were deemed a distraction in class. It was believed that making kids do time by the staff room during recess was a great deterrent. Personally, missing recess suited me fine. I think many people have glorious sepia-toned memories of time spent on the school playground. The sun is shining, the grass is green, the air is filled with squeals of laughter. If you went to McDonald Drive Elementary and you think that way, you're experiencing false memory syndrome. The truth is, at my school, once you crossed the threshold and hit the playground, you were far more likely to encounter gale force winds and some sort of sideways precipitation. The air was filled not with squeals of laughter, so much as the sounds of children being pushed into puddles. That and the constant staccato of metal chains rattling on the flagpole in hurricane winds. Throw in a dented apple and a box of raisins, and that was recess. Fill your boots. Punishing kids by taking away playground access makes a lot of sense. Everyone agrees that children need exercise. It helps them focus in class, keeps them healthy, and hopefully leads to a lifetime habit of regular daily activity. To take a child who is acting out in class and punish them by taking away their chance to go outside and blow off steam is pretty clever. As a bonus, it might lull the child into pursuing a sedentary lifestyle, a lifestyle that will lead them down the road to obesity, high blood pressure, and early onset diabetes. But hey, if you can't do the time, don't do the crime. This is the price you pay for making Timmy Green laugh by gluing your own hand to your forehead during art class. I like spending time on the floor outside of the staff room because I learned if you were very quiet and you were very still, the teachers inside would forget you were there and they would start talking with impunity. Sometimes they would swear. Hearing adults swear was always a forbidden thrill. Sometimes they would talk about other teachers, and always they would talk about the kids. I found this exhilarating. It was impossible for me to shut up and pay attention in a normal class, but when given the opportunity to overhear a grade 4 teacher refer to a specific child as a spoiled little shit, suddenly I had the discipline of a Tibetan monk. Eavesdropping on teachers also allowed me to pick up information that may prove useful. In much the same way a prisoner who works in the warden's office might find out about an impending lockdown, students on the shaming floor might learn in advance of an impending field trip to the local brewery. Information is power. True then, true now. So you can imagine how excited I was when halfway through a lunch hour punishment stint, I distinctly heard one teacher confirm to another there were to be no classes that afternoon. No classes. A mind-boggling development. And I was the only one who knew. This must have been how Churchill felt when he found out before anyone else that Germany was preparing to surrender. I couldn't wait until after lunch and the other kids would come in from the playground, red-cheeked and winded. I would casually say, "Oh, you did your homework." "I didn't. I got a feeling there'll be no school this afternoon anyway." I was confident in my information. So confident that if anyone questioned this, I might even say, "Bet you $1." What I didn't know was why there would be no school. All I knew was that all 3 classes in the pod were to be brought together on the floor in the library, so we would, in the words of Mr. Brace, be subjected to those, in quotes, hippies in a van. It sounded ominous. Unexpected disruption to the school day were not without precedent. Just a few months previously, all class after lunch one day were canceled without warning. We were lined up in the gym and told to stay away from one another at a distance of 2 feet, early shades of what we now know as physical distancing. 2 long lines slowly snaked into the boys' and the girls' change rooms. Inside, strangers in face masks stood over us as they combed through our hair in search of lice. Once you were inspected, you were given a blue card or a red card. The blues went back to class. The reds were sent out to sit on the floor of the gym. I remember a lot of consternation on the part of the lady who was picking through my hair. I don't blame her. In those days, I refused to cut my hair at all. It never grew long. It just grew high and wide. From behind, I looked like Diana Ross. Field mice could have been living in there for all I know. Once inspected, I was issued a red card and sent to the gym. It became pretty evident that the red carders were actually in quarantine. There were about 50 of us sitting at center court, furiously scratching our scalps. A few kids were sniffling back tears, I assume out of embarrassment or maybe horror. Eventually, the principal came and spoke to us from about 30 feet away. And in a calm, reassuring voice, she told us that tiny, wingless creatures had burrowed into our scalps and were drinking our blood. But other than that, everything was fine. Also, our parents had been called. At this news, Bianca Hickey burst out crying and ran towards the principal, arms spread wide, looking for a hug and reassurance. The principal screamed and recoiled in horror as if she was being attacked by something rabid. She sought safety behind the gym teacher and hissed at Bianca to get back with the rest of them, dry heaving for good measure. Your parents have been given instructions on how to bathe you in chemicals. In the meantime, you will stay in the gym until the end of school. No more classes. Most of us greeted this news with cheers and high fives. Bianca continued to sob, head in hands, her long, curly blonde hair hiding her face. The next day, with her smart new bob, she was practically unrecognizable. After lunch, many people were suitably impressed that I had divined that we were getting the afternoon off. "What's happening?" they said as we marched into the library. "Hippies in a van is my guess," I said. "What's that mean?" they said. "If you don't know what that means," I said, "I can't help you." In the library, the tables and chairs were all pulled back, and we were told to sit on the floor in front of what looked like a curtain made from hundreds of pieces of different fabric. It looked exactly like one of my grandmother's quilts. From behind the curtain, a man came that we hadn't seen before. He told us his name was Uncle Val, and he told us he was there to tell us an incredible story of a boy named Jack and an adventure like no other. Now, I now know that Uncle Val is the creation of Canadian comedy legend Andy Jones, he of Codco, a true comedic genius. But right there at that moment, he was 100% Uncle Val. He had me at hello. The company of actors was a local theater company called Sheila's Brush. Their passion for collecting, preserving, and performing traditional stories from Newfoundland and Labrador is legend. The Jack Tales are performed to this day because of their work. Andy would go on to write a series of award-winning children's books about Jack and his adventures. On this day, as the story unfolded, one after another of the characters mentioned emerged from behind the curtain. Some of them danced a jig, one did a handstand, one shook his fist and bared his teeth. In due time, we met our hero Jack, his greedy mother, a brave princess, a benevolent king, a band of pirates, an insane horse, and one hell of a devious cat. I was hypnotized. This was better than anything I'd ever seen. I couldn't believe these actors could make a story like this come to life. It was also the funniest thing I ever saw, and the scariest. Uncle Val made us fall over laughing and then jump out of our skin with fright. And who are these actors? If this wasn't what it meant to be a hippie in a van, sign me up. To hell with being a firefighter or a nurse, a doctor or an astronaut. I wanted to live in a van with a bunch of people with long hair and travel around the Avalon Peninsula. I thought my heart would explode and my head would burst. I didn't know what it was I was experiencing, but I knew I wanted more. Is this how Timmy Green feels about trains? This explained a lot. Transfixed, I heard myself whisper, that should be me up there. And no sooner had I uttered that famous show business incantation that Uncle Val asked, are there any pirate children in the crowd? He then implored the widely clapping horse to find him some child pirates. All around me, kids were raising their hands. The horse was coming into the audience. This was really happening. Kids were scooting closer to the stage on their bottoms, eager to be chosen. I saw the horse's mouth open and grabbed Laura Doobie by the arm. He pulled her onto the stage and deposited her behind the curtain. Then he was back. The horse was coming my way. He was looking for another pirate. I could see the actor inside the giant head. He was looking directly at me. Or was he looking at the little girl next to me, who was also waving her hands? Everything seemed to move in slow motion as the horse's jaws opened and came even closer. I'm not proud of this, but at that precise moment, I body checked Adele Parsons sideways and threw myself with all my might into the horse's mouth. Nothing was going to stop me. And suddenly, I was up there. The horse dragged me to the stage. I struggled mightily because, as eager as I was, I knew instinctively that is what the part called for. And then I was behind the curtain. One of the actors grabbed me and wrapped me in a large shirt with Velcro in the place of buttons. Velcro! Who thought of such a thing? She tied a bandana on my head and put a patch over one eye. I was being transformed. All around me, the other actors were furiously changing from one character to another. The man who only moments ago was the king was now wearing a red dress, a blonde wig, and a crown. From the other side of the curtain, I could hear Uncle Val shouting, the accordion playing, and the audience screaming. I desperately wanted to know what was happening, but I was even more intrigued by the action around me. Backstage. To this day, there is no more exciting place in the world. Moments later, I made my amateur theatrical debut in the role of Pirate Child Number 2. I was told to follow the adult pirate and do exactly as he did. And did I ever? When he danced, I danced. When he shouted, I yelled. And when called upon to do so, I quivered in fear like there was no tomorrow. The audience ate it up. It was the greatest 3 minutes of my life. This, I thought, I can do forever.
Bravo.
Thank you. So that's me coming across Andy Jones and Uncle Val and Sheila's brush in elementary school.
I'm so glad you read that part because as I was reading your book, I was saying to my kids who are in their 20s, like, you should read this book. This is really all about the community, how the community developed in Newfoundland and how people became actors and people now who are, running circus festivals and all of that, how it all started and how much cross-pollination there is.
Yeah,
Before we started, you were talking
it's
about Ed
really,
Riche and you being neighbors and Codco living across the street and all the things and Ron Hines and all the
yeah,
things that happened just in those few houses on Freshwater Road.
and when I was in a comedy troupe. It's in the book, of course, Corey and Wade's Playhouse. So it was myself and Andrew Younghusband and Christine Taylor and Ashley Billard. And we were in a comedy troupe. And Phil Din from Sheila's Brush, he said to me one time, he'd come to one of the shows and he was like, you need a backdrop. I was like, what? He's like, you need a big curtain. We're like, I suppose. And he's like, come with me. And we went down to down on Water Street. The London, New York, and Paris was a storage facility for arts crowd, the arts crowd. And I went in with Phil. It was just filled with props, right? Just junk everywhere. And he wandered over to this corner, and this is Sheila's Brush's corner. There was this giant duffel bag, and he opened this giant duffel bag and he said, "You need to use this." And he pulled out the backdrop, and it was the backdrop from when I was in
It was
grade
the quilt.
3 or whatever. And then I realized it was them. Like I had never made the connection, but I remember the quilt because it was just like my grandmother's quilt. And yeah, there he is years later. Essentially, we were high school kids going, "Oh no, you need this backdrop," and so we used to use that afterwards, and it was quite something. But it was indicative of how supportive people in their 30s and 40s would be of people who were in high school or in 19, 20 years old. It was a pretty amazing time.
It's kind of a unique feature, I think, of Newfoundland, like downtown culture.
Yeah, I don't
St.
know if it
John's.
exists anymore because, of course, I don't live downtown anymore.
Right.
Like most people, I try to, help out and mentor and all those things, but it's not part of, my everyday life. I can't imagine going out and watching a bunch of young people doing a comedy cabaret that starts at 11:30. Not even 11:30 at the hall. I don't think I'm
It's
going
true
to
they
make it
start
like
late.
that. Yeah.
We should try Ed again, see if he's got his
Do we have them? Hear me?
microphone. Oh, yes, we can hear
I
you. We
can
can't
hear you.
see.
Now you got to find that video button there, Eddie.
Yeah, I've been doing that. We've been having trouble. Can you see me now?
No, we can just hear you.
Okay, well that might have to do for now. Do you have a question?
Do you have a question?
Well, the question I was talking to Rick recently. He was here passing through town, and you mentioned that you were having a harder time with the follow-up book, writing it.
Yeah.
Is it because of the first one was hatched in sort of COVID times, or is it the nature of the material?
I think it's the nature of the material, and you don't realize when you're writing. Like when I started writing this book, my line was, and it was a joke, but it was also the truth. I said the problem is I don't like the subject matter that much. Being memoir, like I think everyone wonders if they're a narcissist at a certain point, but then if you start to write a memoir, I think you figure out pretty quick whether you are or not. Like I just would rather write about anything else, but also the material is so rich. Like that time of growing up in St. John's and then meeting these friends that became my comedy colleagues and all these wonderful things that happened. It's much richer to write about. Whereas now I'm writing about the Mercer Report, which in theory might have a bigger audience, but I'm writing about covering Stephen Harper on Parliament Hill and how weird all the people were around him. So you can have fun with that, but it's not something that I'm as passionate about. I think it'll be a good book, but it's tougher. But
Or
but maybe
difference?
second books are tougher. Was your second novel tougher than your first?
No, I don't think so. I
Right.
don't think so. I'm thinking maybe the difference is the first book is like say it's just about fascination and formation and all that excitement in that formative period.
Mm.
But this book now, the second book is going to be about the business. It's going to be about show business, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it'll be
Right.
different because it'll be about, instead of talking about an origin story with Andy Jones, which I'm happy to tell, and also I want to give him credit, and I want to give Sheila Rush credit. That's something I'm passionate about. Whereas the second book will be very much like the time I shot with Neil Peart from Rush, which Rush fans will love, but it's a different kind of passion or a different kind of story. You
How
only
do you
get to write
remember
your
all the
origin story once, right?
sorry to interrupt. How do you remember all the details? Like the detail of that quilted backdrop and the detail of the
Well,
horse.
that all came back to me that day that I was with Phil, and he pulled it out, and it was something that was burned in my memory. But I was very fortunate in writing this book, and everyone should do this. Um, when Gord Downey passed away,
Mhm.
uh, my friend Jeff Dion, who shows up in the book because I traveled with him extensively. Every trip that 22 Minutes ever went on, I was with him. He wrote this beautiful piece about Gord Downey's passing, but it was on Facebook. He's a very good writer, but it started, I'll never forget. We were sitting on the rooftop of this hotel in San Francisco, and Rick Mercer was reading the whatever newspaper and said, "Oh my God, the Tragically Hip are playing in San Francisco tonight." I said, "I never saw the Tragically Hip," and Rick got on the phone with their manager and got us tickets, and we went to Fillmore West and we saw the Hip in San Francisco. And anyway, it was a beautiful little story about the first time he ever saw the Hip. But there were all sorts of details. Like I was like, I remember we saw them in San Francisco. I don't remember that we were on the roof of a hotel by a pool when I read in the paper. So I called Jeff up and I said, "You took a lot of notes, didn't you?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Yeah, maybe maybe I might be able to get access to those notes. And he said, well, I took the notes for two reasons. I took the notes because his background is journalism. He said, we were doing all these crazy things, and I thought I should write this down someday because I might want to write a book. And he also said, I thought Rick is going to write a book, and someday he's going to call me up and want these, and I'm going to say, you should hire me as a researcher. And I said, would you like to work for me as a researcher on this project? He said, yes, I would. And he had incredible notes, and it just brought everything back. It was great. I
Excellent.
don't have anyone who did that for the last 15 years. So it'll be interesting to do it without Jeff's incredible note taking. But he literally, I was thinking, where did you find the time? We would always be so exhausted when we got in bed. Well, you would like make notes, and he was like, yeah, because he's a journalist.
Right. He was the producer, right, for 22 Minutes?
He was the producer. He was the news guy who came to work with us and risked it all because he never could have gone back to news afterwards.
Right, right. He was probably making notes for legal reasons too.
Maybe, yes. Yeah, exactly.
We've got a couple of listeners. I want to ask you and Ed about how you first met and, when you first collaborated, but I want to just go to listen some of the listener comments. Wanda says she would have loved to have been your teacher. Someone else asked if you are doing a New Year's show this year. Matt wants to know if you're doing a New Year's show this year, like last year.
Yes, I won't be in my shed, unfortunately. Last year, because of COVID, we just said, I'm staying in the shed. I'll be at Blue Mountain in Ontario, which is a ski resort just north of Toronto.
Yeah.
And same thing, we'll be popping all over the country. And I'll be hosting New Year's Eve again on CBC. Yeah.
Cool. Christine wants to know, how did you choose your publisher, or did the publisher choose you?
Ed and I had the same agent. And so I'm guessing Ed had Suzanne as an agent before I did. So I'm guessing when Gerald and I wanted to do a book, we probably said to Ed, how do you do a book? And Ed delivered us to Suzanne Depot, and we developed a relationship with the group that I'm still with.
Cool.
Yeah, so there's been no switching. But my early books were kind of cheating, and they weren't cheating, but they were TV books. They were like they were the rants from the TV show, so it had a built-in audience, on like a real novel or a real work of nonfiction, right? So the early books they weren't cheating, but they weren't novelty books necessarily, but they were TV books, right? Unlike this one wasn't.
So how did
there's only like 2 publishers left in the world, other than the handful of great independent publishers, but they're just gobbling each other up at an incredible rate.
Mm-hmm. So when
did
you and Ed first work together? Was it at the Hall? Was it a TV script? I know you wrote a lot of TV scripts together.
We hung out together, Edward, before we started writing together. And
yeah,
I don't know.
I said to Angela earlier, the first time we met was me going to see your show at the Hall with Corey and Wade's play.
Yeah, because we were like a thing, and all the older crowd, Ed would have been one of them, only by a few years, but still, like, because we were in high school, remember? So it was pretty insane after our first show. Suddenly, people who weren't in school with us were coming to the door, and then the kids in school couldn't get in. That was pretty insane. And so Ed would have been that crowd. But I don't know what we first wrote together. We wrote a couple of screenplays together, and we worked with.
You were talking to me the other day. There was one you said, do you even have a copy of that thing we wrote? You were actually asking me, and I couldn't answer the question. It was like, what was it about? Was this the title? Who did we do it for? Like,
yeah, but I remember us being in the office. We wrote a road movie about 2 Newfoundlanders driving across Canada back to Newfoundland. We were being chased. It was a road movie. I don't remember much. But we definitely wrote it. Then we wrote High Alert for Norman Jewison, which was a real wonderful experience for both Ed and I, because Norman Jewison is so incredibly famous and has such incredible stories. Mm-hmm. And High Alert was a rewrite of one of Norman's great comedies called The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming.
Okay.
And it wasn't necessarily a very good idea, but of course, Ed and I both said, yes, of course, because it was working with Norman Jewison, right? Yeah, but we've written a lot over and when Gerald and I did Made in Canada, Ed probably wrote more episodes of that than anyone else. And his were all the best episodes.
That was me and Bob Martin wrote the best episodes, I think.
Yeah, and Bob as well was very good.
Yeah.
When you and Gerald did the Mercer report, you say in the book that, Canadians really wanted to know about their own country and in the face of collective uncertainty. And now we've got, a very different situation with the pandemic, and we've got the Alberta Sovereignty Act. Healthcare is falling apart across the country. Inflation's running wild. Have you ever been tempted to, put up your hand and say, I want to do another kind of Mercer
No,
report? Or
not right now, just because I did that for such a long time. But all the years I was doing 22, and we were this really cool show, and it was kind of a heyday at CBC. There was a bunch of shows that were doing really well, but Wayne Rostad had that show On the Road Again.
That's right.
And Wayne had 5 cents. If he had 5 cents, that was it. And if you looked at the ratings, 22 will always do 1 million, Air France is doing 1.4 million, whatever. All these shows are hits. Wayne always did 600,000-700,000. And I'd be like, God, people love Wayne, and no one advertises his show. They move him all over the place. They still find him. They follow him. And I would see some of those segments and be like, if he just had a little bit more in terms of resources, that could be, such a great segment. And I liked it. So when I had the chance to do my own show, that's what I wanted to do. And it's funny, I remember Mary Walsh was interviewed about the Mercer report when it aired, or the Monday report with McLean's, and she said, well, he's just being Wayne Rostad without the guitar. And people thought, oh, wow, Walsh really dissed you there. And I was like, no, she figured it out. That's exactly what I'm doing. But I love doing that stuff. Like, if you could call me tomorrow with 3 gigs, and 2 of them have more money and be more interest, a higher profile, but one of them involves going to Iqaluit, I'll be like, I'll take the Iqaluit gig. That's cool. Let's do that.
Because you did a lot of travel with
Yeah,
all the
I loved
shows,
it.
didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
love
once
it.
you
And
got out of the
I'm
22
good at
minute
it.
studio.
I'm good at it. Some people aren't good at traveling. Some people it stresses them out or whatever. I was good at it. Didn't bother me. It was good.
How did Talking to Americans start?
Well, we were all ambushing politicians.
Yeah.
And I was pretty good at ambushing politicians, and Walsh was pretty good at ambushing politicians. And so we were very competitive, and Mary and I were incredibly competitive. And then one day, Mary went to Ottawa, and she, instead of going as Marg, which was formidable, she went as Marg, Princess Warrior. And then she took it to a whole new level. And it was like, well, that's done. She owns this now. And so I went to Jeff and I said, let's go to Washington. And we went to Washington. We started going there. But we didn't have any access. No one knew who we were. And the audience really liked me in Washington. But part of the excitement was like, oh, wow, he's in Washington. And then one day we were just there. And this guy, I won't take too long with this story, but we were just on a break waiting for the light to get right to do a rant.
Yep.
And this guy walked past me, and there was the CBC case that the camera was in. It had the CBC logo on it. It said Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. He was like looking at it. He had a suit on and stuff, had a Pentagon pass, and he was like, Canadian Broadcasting. I said, yep. And he went, Canada. I said, yes. And he said, what are you doing way up here? And I got, oh my God. And then I just made up a story. I don't know why I did it. I just made up a story about that we were there covering a summit between President Bill Clinton and President Ralph Ben-Mergy of Canada. And he went, oh, I heard about that. And then I called Jeff and Pete Sutherland, my cameraman, over, and we never did interviews on the street. We never, ever. We all hated it. We never did it, ever. And I said, oh, I'm going to interview this gentleman. And they just went, oh, okay, as if we do this all the time. And I said, we're here for the summit between President Clinton and President Ben-Mergy. There's a lot of confusion whether it should be called the Clinton-Ben-Mergy Summit or the Ben-Mergy-Clinton Summit. What do you think, sir? And he said, I think it should be called the Ben-Mergy-Clinton Summit. And I said, why? He said, alphabetical order. I said, how does that work exactly? I don't think we have that in Canada. He said, oh. And then he explained alphabetical order to me.
The process of alphabetizing
And then
something.
we had this little piece. Yeah, he was like, something begins with A, goes before B. B goes before C. You see, Ben-Mergy begins with B. Clinton begins with C. Ben-Mergy, Clinton. I was like, that's great. And so we had this little tape, and then we were like, what are we going to do with it? Well, we need a few more. So I interviewed a few more people, and then we honestly forgot about it, and I didn't know whether it would even go there. And then Jeff said, oh, we'll run it under credits. And he went and cut it together, and he called it Talking to Americans, and he did the voiceover and all that. And when it played back, like, people just exploded, and they loved it. And it was it was all anyone was talking about. Like, private radio stations were playing the clip and stuff. And my father called me up, and he never ever commented on the show. And he said, a lot of people are talking about that show. Jerry Travers called, said he liked that Talking to Americans, and Frank down the street said, wants to know if you're going to do it again. I said, yeah, it's crazy. It's so popular. And he said, promise me something. You'll never, ever do that again. That's in terrible taste. I'm like, what? And then, of course, I did it nonstop for like 2 years. Dad thought it was in terrible, terrible taste. He was like, they gave us a Christmas tree after the Halifax explosion. I'm like, yes, I know, but yeah.
Ed, were you trying to get in there to ask a question?
No, I just love this. The question, here's the question, and it's for our times too, because you're going to be more and more careful all the time. You can get canceled very easily. So
Sure.
Is part of comedy being in bad taste? Is it necessarily? Does it work because it's transgressional? I mean, I can think of lots of stuff on 22 Minutes you never do now. I mean, everybody I know who works in this business sits down at some point after supper with a glass of wine and says, oh my God, they'd crucify us for that now. So how do you navigate that now?
You're absolutely right. A big part of comedy is being in bad taste. A big part of comedy is upsetting people. Although people used to get upset, people would be like, people they don't get upset. They don't go like, I don't like that. They're like, I want that person dead. I want them stopped. The only thing, I'm a bit lucky, like, I'm 53 years old, like, I'm not in that place anymore of being outrageous, and there's a certain style of comedy that's the domain of people in their teens and 20s and 30s, right? I have a different act now. I host New Year's Eve. But yeah, we couldn't be starting over, I don't think. Like, if 22 Minutes couldn't be created in the climate that we're in today. I mean, 22 Minutes now, they seem to be finding a new audience and stuff, but it's very progressive. Mm-hmm. It's a very progressive show, and fine. That's, like, I have nothing to do with it. I'm not in the room, but it's a very progressive show, and that's what they do, and that's all fine and dandy, It's a different time, because it used to be.
It was subversive, but you always had a glint in your eye. There was always a charm factor there. Like, you weren't upsetting people, except politicians.
Well, there weren't rules. There weren't, like, and now there's like 100 rules. There's 100. Oh no, you can't say that because of this. You can't do this because of this. You can't say that because of this. Oh no, there's just 100 rules. There never used to be any rules. You didn't care about the rules.
Who do you find funny now? Who's a comedian that you watch?
Bill Burr is a comedian that I find really funny. He's a guy who seems to keep working and not getting canceled. I find there's so many comedians now, famous comedians, are being pulled into these camps where it's less and less about the comedy or the show. You lie on the couch, it's all about where you stand on the bit. It's like Lenny Bruce back in the day. Like, Lenny Bruce stopped being funny and just read his court transcripts. So now, there's just so many that are being pulled into that world. Like, it's very weird.
Any young Newfoundland comics that you're following or interested in?
All these, there's so many young stand-ups that are great, and that didn't exist when I'm so old. But there wasn't any stand-up like that. We just didn't have that. Like, I was an adult. I was in my 20s and on the mainland before I ever saw anyone do stand-up. But now there's stand-up at on Water Street, and there's lots of stand-ups. It's great.
Funny. Why wasn't there stand up here? I mean, we had if there was a venue for it, all that talent that was there, those people that you mentioned earlier, I mean, they would have been geniuses at it. Is it just because it was being manifested some other way in the theater or something? It just seemed strange. Of all the people,
Yeah.
like Newfoundlanders, like telling stories, which is essentially what stand up is,
Yeah.
it has always puzzled me that it never.
It's too
It didn't.
formal, maybe, for Newfoundlanders. Too formalized.
Well, I mean, Newfoundlanders used to, recite things, which is
Yeah.
kind of stand up in a way. But the first time I ever saw anyone go alone on stage was Greg Toomey. And I used to think, Greg Toomey's like, he's screwed. He doesn't have a comedy troupe. Just because of his age, there's no people around. Whereas I had Andrew, Christine, and Ashley. So I had a comedy troupe. So it took me a long time before I would even consider going alone on stage. But I guess we were just following in Kodko's footsteps.
Oh, you mentioned the recitations? Never, ever, ever follow Dave Patton. Oh, the guy, he's going to just destroy the house. And you're just going to look, he is so good. Never follow him.
Yeah. We've got a few more comments from the audience. I've lost track. Actually, there's so many. Will your book be available in audiobook form? It is available, right?
It is available in audio, and now all books are, or not all books, but it's a big thing. Greg Malone directed the audiobook.
Great.
Which just, again, this is an origin story. So there's sections in this book about me as a child, like just idolizing Greg and Tommy. There I am in the booth, and Greg is directing me going, oh, that sentence, you rushed that one a little bit. So it's a little weird. It was a bit meta, but Greg Malone directed it, and it's a big thing now, audiobooks. The kids love audiobooks apparently because of their growing up on podcasts.
Their podcast, yeah.
Yeah. And there's lots of people like, Jillian Kiley, who directed Telltale Harbor with Ed. I bumped into her at Perchance Theater in the summer, and she said, oh, I really liked your book. I said, oh, thanks, Jillian. I've known her for years. And she was like, yeah, I listen to it, when I walk around the lake. I was like, oh, right. Like, now when people say they like your book, they didn't necessarily read it. They listen to it, which is great. I mean, it's all good, but it happens.
There's a former classmate from grade 3 who says, I enjoyed the walk down memory lane. Now, I hope it wasn't the woman who, you pushed out of the way to get on stage.
No, I used her real name. I changed most names, but I'm pretty sure it was Adele Parsons. But
this woman's name is Karen, so it's not her.
Okay, I heard from a lot of people who went to that school about the no walls.
There's kind of walls. It's still wacky in there.
Yeah.
In the book you have now, in the current book, and the one you're working on, has there ever been an instance where you talked to someone and said, I was going to relate this story, and they said, don't you dare tell that story in the book?
Yes. Well, famously, my brother, there's a story about me and the two of us cutting a Christmas tree, and we cut it off a neighbor's lawn. And I was just like, I don't care. He was like, we promised we would never, ever tell. We take that to the grave. And I was like, you were 11? I was 7 or something? Like, sorry. But no one else. And you know what? When I decided to do this, I like reading memoir. I think I read memoir more than you, Ed. I like memoir, but I don't like memoir when I feel like people are settling scores. And even people who are wildly successful, suddenly they're like bitter about something that happened early in their career.
Right.
So I never ever wanted to appear like I was settling scores, and I didn't really want to have to face anyone that in my life and have them look at me and go like, "Why did you put that in the book?" So it's not like I just don't have a desire to embarrass anyone or to kind of create that angst. and it's not like I even
Except
struggled
your
with it.
brother.
There was no point where I thought, oh, I want to tell that story. I mean, there's
Except
a
your brother.
famous story going around now in Canada. You know, there's someone who wrote a memoir, and they're talking about an early sexual encounter that one of the person that was involved says it was a sexual assault, and it's all very, in the lit world, or everyone's talking about it. But I just kind of wonder, like, why would you include something like that you know is going to cause such anguish for anyone? Like, I don't get it myself.
Was there a
And even
memoir
like
that you
now, Ed,
read?
even now, if I'm writing this book now, like you would show up in this book, in theory. Like I would never want to have that conversation. Ed, I'm going to tell this story. It's going to be deeply embarrassing to you. Like, why would you do that? Like, you just got to make those calls. You can't go through life like that.
I'd say back at you.
Yeah, I know, but it wouldn't come up.
Yeah.
But I know people who have struggled with that stuff. But
Was there a memoir that you read when you were writing yours that really inspired you or really? Um,
no. In fact, I avoided memoir like the plague
oh, okay.
when I was writing it. I just didn't want to. And like I say, I like it. In fact, I avoided reading a lot. Because I felt, even though I can procrastinate like anyone, but when I sat down and picked up a book and started reading it, I thought I was really cheating on my own book.
Okay.
Which is, I could watch a movie and not feel that way, but I was like, oh, you're reading, you should be writing, and so I didn't. And when you're writing, do you continue to read? Like, if you're writing a novel, do you continue to read novels?
I do, but like as you point out too, I don't read any of my Newfoundland peers, any of the books that are around near me. So I always read them years later because I don't want them to any of that to. And in my case too, I'd be tempted to sort of maybe saucily mimic a passage or something for badness and so on. So to
Right,
avoid that kind of
right.
temptation, I don't read any of my sort of peer group here in Newfoundland. I won't read them, but yeah, I do. I do read stuff I read writers far more accomplished than myself, just to show myself how it's done.
Right.
Always good to just pick up the collected works of Shakespeare, read a couple lines, and go, "Oh, Jesus Christ, fuck."
Yes. I kind of avoid the funny. Like, if I'm writing, I kind of avoid reading people that I consider very funny. But of course, one of the reasons I like Ed so much is there's not a lot of funny books that are published these days. I live next to one of the great independent bookstores in Toronto, and they're famous for they're all book lovers. You can go in there and ask them anything. But if you ever go in there and go, got anything funny? No.
Funny's hard.
Mm,
Now, well, back
These are
the day, this is because the world's very different now. Because I bet you most books are bought online. My first novel, Rare Birds, so I have no reputation whatsoever. Nobody's going to know me in the retail book world, but the book did really well, and then did better, and then did better. And the publishers insisted that this was because it was hand sold. In the old days, when there were lots of bookstores, it was hand sold in bookstores by people in the bookstore who were answering that very question.
yeah,
They said,
yeah,
no, and also you'd hear this account all the time because people say, yeah, but is it really funny? Like really funny? And then you go, no, really funny, like with funny
yeah,
things in it. And because, it's such a rare commodity that people would not believe. What, and then you're saying, oh, it's Canadian. Oh, come on.
yeah. I know, and it's but I take their advice. If they ever said to me, "Oh no, it's really funny," I would absolutely take their advice. That's the way.
We've got a
I'm
ton
sure
of
that's the way your
questions.
book was sold.
We've got
What's
a
that?
ton of questions from viewers, and one of them, there's a few about teachers. And have teachers ever come back to you and apologized for, giving you a hard time in school or not finding you funny? Uh,
No, 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 no. And I would feel terrible if a teacher ever did that, because no, teachers didn't give me a hard time, and you know, in the book, I talk about Lois Brown, who many people would know because she was an educator for this long.
Yeah.
Right? I just happened to be in high school when she decided to try a straight gig. But so, you know, she was, you know, that classic teacher who changed my life. But all the other teachers, by and large, I was really lucky, including, you know, Dick Rich, who was Ed Riche's father, who taught me in grade 8 and was an English teacher, was a great English teacher. I had good teachers by and large. I think, but you know, what a teacher's going to do? They look at a guy like me. I was like such a bad student, but they probably had other bad students who had a reason to be a bad student. So if I was the one, I'd be going, I'm going to help this kid who like needs to be helped versus this moron who's just not doing the work and is lazy and talking or whatever. Like, yeah, I would never. I have no problem with any of the teachers I had that way.
Robert wants to know if you have another story about Clyde Flight. Robert is a 73 PwC grad.
Well, it's long before me, but was Clyde there then? I guess he was he? Well, Clyde Flight was the principal of the school. He's in the book. He's the one who hired Lois.
Okay.
And he's the one to run a theater program, and they never had a theater program before, a proper one. And it was him. He's the one who wanted one, and he wanted a proper band program. And he hired John Bonia, who's now deceased, and they never had a proper band. And I didn't know that because this all happened like a year before I showed up. So I just thought, oh, there was always theater, there was always a band. But so he was you know, he was a big supporter of that, even though it didn't come naturally to him. Although ironically, his son became an opera singer, but it didn't come naturally to him. Like he didn't really get the drama crowd or the band crowd, but he thought it was important. And the interesting thing, and I write about this in the book, like Ashley Billard, who became a great friend of mine, like he shows up at the school and he's this punk rocker and he's like, you know, not 80 pounds if he's that. And he's in the wrong school. And he goes, the principal goes, I'm not supposed to be in the school. I'm supposed to be in like, you know, whatever other school, Brother Rice or Gonzaga or whatever. Why am I even here? Like I live downtown. I'm supposed to be in this other school with my cousins and my friends. And Flight was like, well, it's a terrible mistake. There's nothing that can be done. You're just gonna have to ride it out. And Ashley's like, this is bullshit. And then Ashley goes out to the smoking area. Me and Don Ellis are out there, and we have our Clash and Ramones t-shirts on. So he's like, I guess I hang out with you. But unbeknownst to us, this was all orchestrated because they decided Ashley needed to be away from those people. And they put him in PwC. I didn't know schools did stuff like that. And not only that, they put him in all of Lois's classes.
Oh.
Any class Lois had. And it was like, and Clyde did that. Clyde was like, take this kid who was at risk and like just put him with Lois Brown in whatever class she's teaching. I don't care. And then he went into the theater and, you know, yeah, so Clyde was one of those. He was one of those good guy principals.
On the Sunshine List.
But he almost, yeah, actually,
progress in education. What a great education system we have.
Yeah, and yeah, Clyde was, you know, he's a champion, but he didn't get it. Like he didn't get what we were up to, and he almost suspended me twice. But I called him about this book, and I said, remember this one occasion, which was a huge thing. He was like, I don't remember that. I was like, you don't remember the newspaper? And he's like, no. I'm like, come on. And then I just let it go.
He didn't have Jeff Dion keeping notes for him.
No, he remembers.
Aaron Alford asks if you still cut down your own Christmas tree.
No, it's been a while, but I haven't had a Christmas tree in so long because I live in Toronto. But for gentle Lord, how many 25 years, Ed? We fly back and we go and decorate Ed's.
Oh yeah.
But we have on occasion cut Ed's down, but you know, rare.
We've cut down on your some land your dad owns. We've gone there.
We've gone. Yeah.
Tree, and you're also booked in. Just gonna say, the wife is booking you in to decorate the tree again this year.
Yeah. So that's part of it. That's our tradition.
Erin also wants to know about Jean Chrétien and the impression that he made on you. And she says, I wonder if you could speak to that lunch and what happened on the way back to the Hill.
Well, I'm a big fan of Chrétien as a politician. Like, if you admire politicians, and I've been thinking about all these guys recently because of the new book I'm writing. Stephen Harper had to overcome, he probably overcame more than any politician ever in order to achieve what he achieved, because the tools you need to succeed in politics, like Harper's toolbox was empty. Whereas Chrétien, like, he's charming, he can talk to anyone. If you sat next to him on a plane to this day, and he had incredibly smart people around him, super smart. But very quickly, we did the shoot together, famously at Harvey's. I won't go into the whole machinations of why Chrétien agreed to go to Harvey's with me, but as we were getting ready to leave, he was getting ready to leave, and of course, he's got like RCMP in the car and everything, and I had a ride. I mean, I was with Jeff and the boys, and I said, where are you headed? And he said, back to the Hill. I said, can I get a ride with you? And it was like a 25-minute ride. I was just bumming around. He said, okay, fine. So I got in the ride and I took my microphone off, and he's very familiar with these things. Took my pack off. I laid the pack down between the seats, turned it off. You could see the light was off. Unplugged the microphone. I wound up the microphone, as a good TV guy does. And he reached out and he took the microphone part that you would normally wear there, and he put it in his hand and he closed it like that. And he kept it there for 20 minutes. And we just chatted all the way home, but he wasn't making any.
Wow.
There was no chance that thing was still recording at all. And but mostly he grilled me. Like, he took the 20 minutes. I wanted to grill him, but he grilled me. What did my parents think? What did my parents think of the Liberals? How's Brian Tobin doing? Do people not like him? What do they like him? What are they saying about him? What are your friends saying about this or that? Like, it was, he wanted the portal 20. He decided to make the 20 minutes about what he could learn about Newfoundland versus him telling any stories or anything.
Right.
And he just grilled me. Yeah. Yeah, he had very smart people around him.
That's fantastic. Now, before we go, we're getting to the end. So if anyone has any questions, get them up there now. But we want to ask you about your local picks, your favorite local literature. And we have a slide of that.
Yes. Okay, so I think the first one.
Rare Birds.
We have a slide.
Rich. Yep, the slide.
Anyway, the first one is Rare Birds by Ed Riche. And I mean, as you know, obviously we're friends, but I love this book for a bunch of reasons. The only reason this one is in my house is because Ed signed it when it first came out. I sent off a copy of this book to Ivan Decker, who I believe is the funniest stand-up comic young man working in Canada today, just this summer from Woody Point. I probably gifted this book more than any book. Again, not because we're buddies, because that only goes so far. I just think it's a very funny book. It's a great premise. Of course, it became a fantastic movie starring Andy Jones, and he wrote it while we were neighbors. But again, that's not really important. It's just a very, very funny book. And like I say, Ivan Decker, he's not from Newfoundland. He's been in Newfoundland once on a comedy tour with me. He doesn't know anything about Newfoundland. I gave it to him. He loved it. It's a great book. And the character of Fonz is one of the great Newfoundland creations.
Absolutely.
First Snow, Last Light. I had to write it on because I don't know where my copy is. I looked. What I love about Wayne Johnson's First Snow, Last Light was I, like everyone else, read Colony of Unrequited Dreams. I loved Sheila Fielding. But when the book was over, I knew there was never going to be a sequel. Of course there's not, the nature of the book. So I just assumed the character was gone. And this is what I love about fiction, that you can recreate these characters that, like, I never in a million years would have guessed, oh, she'll come back and solve mysteries involving Jeff Sterling. Like, but this is what you can do in fiction. So I really love that. And I don't know Wayne very well at all, but this summer I was in Woody Point with him, and we ended up spending some time in the airport, a lot of time in the airport together. And of course, his current book is a very heavy book, and Wayne is capable of writing very heavy books. And I hated to be that guy. I was like, yeah, very heavy themes, a lot of brutality and sexual assault and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is there another Sheila Fielding mystery in the works there? Is that in the works? And I could see he wasn't really thrilled to get that question, but I just think she's great. She's great, and I hope she solves more mysteries. It's a great fun read, and I also I have a bit of a fascination with the Jet Sterling character, and of course there's a character in there it's not Jet Sterling, but it's obviously inspired by Jet Sterling. It's pretty fascinating. Then my wild card is Newfoundland Modern by Robert Mellon. Architecture in the Smallwood Years, 49 to 72. It's just, I don't know why I picked this up. Like, I like buildings, I do like architecture and stuff, but I don't know why I bought this book, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's, there was just, Newfoundland is so unique. After 49, there's so much was built, so many hospitals, so many churches, so many everything, all this infrastructure that didn't exist before 1949. So much of it was modern. There's great photography in it. You don't think of all these, modern architectural builds from the 40s to the 70s in Newfoundland, but there was tons of it. And it's just a real labor of love. It's very beautifully done. And books like this I find very impressive because it's they're so expensive to produce. The amount of work that has to go into creating a book like this, it's like the opera. Like, it makes no sense why you would do something like this. And it's a real, it's great fun to look through. And if you're from St. John's, you see houses. Look, I just opened it up. The McDonald residence, right? 1952. That's down the street from Ed's. We always walk by that house. I always say, oh, I love that house. Like, there's so many cool houses in St. John's that you'll recognize. So many buildings you recognize. That fantastic bridge in the park. What's the bridge, Ed?
In Bowring Park.
In Bowring Park that none of us knew about.
Yeah.
Yeah, the guy designed the Sydney Opera House, I believe.
Yeah, but I never knew that all growing up. And we used to go to that park as kids, and God, I don't even remember it. So there's so much in there. That's so great.
I hate to wrap this
So those
up.
are my choices.
I hate to wrap this up because this is really fun, but before we go to Lisa Brown, who's Memorial's VP of External Affairs and Advancement, I have one question I've been dying to ask you, Rick Mercer, and that is, have you ever written fiction, or are you writing fiction?
I have attempted to write fiction, a little bit. Robert Chafe is the only person who's ever read it.
Okay, that's a good person to have read it.
I suppose. I don't know. And it wasn't a lot. It was just like a chapter.
Okay.
And it was quite a while ago. And but never say never. But I'm not one of those people who, I always find it weird when people go, oh, I think next I'm going to write a historical novel. It's like, why don't you just write that historical novel and keep that to yourself instead of pretending that you can do that? Like, I would never pretend that I could write a novel. Like, until I'm 3/4 the way there, and I consulted with people like Edward, I would never pretend that I have that ability.
I didn't believe I was writing Rare Birds when I brought down the name.
I never believed. I know. Ed gave me Rare Birds. He tells the story. He brings it to me and he goes, I want you to read it. I was like, what's this? I mean, we were neighbors. We saw each other every day. And it was, it was a manuscript. And I said, you mean you were really writing a novel up there? I didn't know what he was doing up there, going up writing his novel. Anyway, I would never presume.
But do you have a daily writing practice? Do you write every day?
I wish I did. Right now, I'm in a terrible period of procrastination. But when I was writing this book that we're talking about today, I did. It was very disciplined, and I need to get back to that because that's the only way you can do it. But yeah, you got me on a bad day to ask that question.
All right, I'm
The
gonna.
World Cup is on, for God's sakes.
Oh
I mean,
yeah, that's true.
how can you write?
Lisa, you should turn on your
Edward
camera.
writes every day. Edward writes every day, no matter what. He's always, and he's got multiple things on the go. I've never been good at that.
Yeah, you have to, I think, yeah. Thank you both for joining us. Thanks, Ed, for bringing all you brought to the conversation. Would have been nice to see your face, but it was nice to hear your voice. And thanks, Rick, and get down to work on the next
I
one.
will. Oh, listen, my editor's calling daily.
All right, I'd like to welcome Memorial's VP of External Affairs and Advancement, Lisa Brown, who is also a Dead Reckoning fan.
Who isn't though, really? Come on. If you're of that age, yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Rick. It's always such a pleasure. I really enjoyed reading the book and I could hear your voice in every single word. And I think that's a great compliment, actually. It was certainly true to you. So thank you very much. Ed, great to hear from you and hear the conversation. It makes me wonder what you're doing there behind that camera, but thanks so much for joining us. Angela, I think your voice must be one of the most recognizable voices in the province these days. Like as soon as I hear it, I know it's you, of course. So thank you for hosting our book clubs throughout the year. And special thanks as well to Janet and Darcy, who are always behind the scenes and always working away, but everything looks so smooth up front. So thanks to everyone for joining us as well. And I think, Angela, you're going to talk about our next book club.
I am. Our next one, which is coming up in January, is part of Sparks Literary Festival. And it's the selection is Hard Ticket. As you can see there, it's an anthology of stories by some of the most exciting new writers in Newfoundland, selected by Lisa Moore. And that will be on January the 21st with an in-person event, real life in-person at the Signal Hill campus. And we'll have Xavier Michael Campbell, Alison Graves, Carmela Gray Cosgrove, Jim McEwen, William Ting, who has an amazing new novel out, and really looking forward to you joining us at that event online or in person. And thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
We'll see you all again in the new year. Have a great holiday, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.